or, and I'll just repeat it, just so you know, we will have time for questions at the end as well. Okay, so today we're talking about restorative justice practices. Restorative justice means a system of criminal justice which focuses on the rehabilitation of offenders through reconciliation with victims and the community at large. So the first thing that I have for everyone on the panel is what brought you into this work? What was there a single experience or a path of behaviors that you saw that led you where you're at now? And anyone can start.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Noelle Frame. I'm the state representative from the 36th Legislative District, which is the northwest corner of the city of Seattle, and currently serve as the vice chair of the Human Services and Early Learning Committee, which is where a lot of this work happens for the juvenile system. Frankly, for me, the interest and the passion comes from being in a family, frankly, with intergenerational trauma, abuse, neglect, addiction, incarceration, and seeing, members of my own family, both as perpetrators and victims, and seeing some of those folks, grow up and heal and be productive members of society. I joke that I am radically compassionate. I think sometimes it may be to a fault, but it's really a driver for me. And personally, in the work that we're doing, and welcome to Senator Darnielle, we do a lot of work with youth directly and having youth advocate for themselves in these reforms we're making. And there is few other things in the world that bring me greater joy than enabling and empowering other young folks to advocate for themselves. So that's what brings me to the work.
Am I the last one?
Nope. You're the second.
And introduce yourself first. And so the question was, what brought you into this work, and was there a single experience or pattern of behaviors that you saw that got you where you are today?
Introduce yourself first.
Hi, Jeannie Darnielle. Wow, nice faces in the audience today. State Senator from Tacoma. Sorry I'm late. Traffic got me. I chair the Human Services Reentry and Rehabilitation Committee and in the Senate, and have been working on juvenile justice issues for many years, not because I particularly had a lot of family or personal experience, except the experience of privilege, which meant that I got to be on restriction instead of incarcerated when I was young. But my dad was a Air Force sergeant, so that had its own kind of restrictive qualities, if you can imagine. But my experiences in the human services world are that we have many interconnectedness points, and certainly as we see families who are struggling, we also see issues related to poverty, mental health, substance use, lack of access to education and other opportunities, job experiences. So those are the kinds of bundling of issues that bring me to working on innovative strategies to help individuals and families succeed.
My name is Daryl Massey. I am part of the Black Prisoners Caucus, the People's Institute, and the Village of Hope out of King County. I am a formerly incarcerated inmate. I've been out since 2017. I did 28 years in prison from 1989 to 2017. I am Renika's father, and I think my work, what brought me to this work, is I mentor kids while I was in prison. I talked to at-risk kids, so judges and politicians and police officers would bring kids in, and I was part of a group called Choice and Consequences. That and me having children in prison is what made me think about restorative justice even before I came home. So I think I'll go more into my story when I just want to introduce myself and say that's how I'm involved in restorative justice.
Hi everyone, my name is Noah Purcell. I'm the Solicitor General in the Attorney General's office here in Washington State. And I grew up in Seattle and went to public schools in South Seattle. And I guess I would say my interest in these topics came from seeing a lot of my friends and classmates not get the opportunities that they deserved as young people, and the way that that shaped their courses in life as they got older, and how many students I knew who were capable of achieving a lot in life and who just didn't get the opportunities that they should have. So I'll leave it there for now. But
Minnesota. My name is Gong T. Representing API-CAG, Asian Pacific Islander Cultural Awareness Group, and also representing formerly incarcerated group Healing Together. I became involved with restorative justice. I think when that helping hand came to me, I did serve some time, 3.5 years. And I just saw my life at a young age and how much pain I was causing, not just within my own life and my own families, but to others as well. And for that hand to be reached out to help me, it was very touching on my end, and it was very heartfelt, and so I appreciated that. And so I had to find a way to try to give back. I think that's part of why I'm here and got involved with the restorative justice.
Perfect. So I would like to hear more from you, T, and Dad/Daryl on being involved in the criminal justice system. What are your overall thoughts on restorative justice, and do you think that one system works better over the other one?
To say one system works better than the other, I think it takes a village, right? So I think, yeah. So I think it takes a village. Definitely, I think you need the courts involved as well as the individual and a support system, right? And sometimes that individual may not always have a support system. So I think that support system should be in place even before the courts come in. What was the other part?
Just what are your thoughts on restorative justice as a whole?
My thoughts on restorative justice. I definitely feel that there's a need for it. There's a lot of areas in people's lives where they have been impacted because it was just unfair. Yeah, that's what I have so far.
Well, this is kind of touchy for me because I think for you to restore justice, you have to have justice. And I think in a lot of cases, there's not justice. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot needs to be put to be doing things proactive before we start trying to do things that's reactive. Mm-hmm. And the other part is education. I think so much money is put into restorative justice now, and a lot of it should be going towards early education. Mm-hmm. So I think it starts with things like special ed, and you're breeding criminals when you're doing this stuff already at a young age when you're ostracizing kids in special ed and teach them that they're not significant. So if you're already putting that in a child's head that he's insignificant or he's second to someone else, he already feels that, so he's already behind the 8 ball. Now, I'm not making excuses for the crimes some of us have committed, but if you're in that type of environment from school, and that's what you have since you're 7 and 8 years old, you shouldn't have those pressures as a young kid at school feeling that way. So I think a lot of it starts with education. And it's proven, we got education things going on in prison now, and it's making better men. That's what we always promoted when I was in prison was, how can we make better men, not better inmates, not paying your debt off to society. You're paying your debt off to society during your time in prison, but what's going to happen when this guy that's a murderer or a rapist is released from prison if he's not becoming a better man in prison? So I don't know if that means more restorative justice programs in prison. I don't know if that means more education for guys in prison. I don't know if that means more drug treatment, mental health things for guys that's in prison, or even before they go to prison. And one of the biggest things about restorative justice for me when I came home is I had no help. I went to work release, but nobody helped prepare me how to fill out a checkbook, a debit card. And you have to think, I went to prison in 1989. I'd never seen the internet, ever. So I had to get out, go to King County where I've never been to in my whole life and learn how to catch a bus. So these things aren't set up for a person. And this was a person that I had had a major infraction in prison probably the last 13 years before I came home. But you have some guys that's coming home straight from isolation, that's in segregation and been there for 4 years, not having physical contact with any human being other than a guard. And he's kicked out to society saying, figure it out. And then we're all watching the news at home and saying, why these guys don't know how to utilize their second chances. For one, this guy didn't know how to deal with people because he's been in isolation like an animal for the last 4 years before he came home. And I think that's wrong if the Department of Corrections is releasing people without giving them, some way to have a cool down time before they go home and have a guy trained. Because we have to adapt and train when we go to prison. The things we can't say and what do, it should be the same thing when you come back into society, because who wants a neighbor like that? Who wants to go on a bus or be driving on the street with a guy with road rage because he don't know how to deal with conflict, because he's been in isolation like a gorilla for 4 years before he was released from prison. So I just think some of those things should be addressed when we're talking about restorative justice. I think all those things are a piece of it. And that's educating DOC, educating citizens, us educating each other. So it's like, I think forums like this is perfect to have politicians and family members and people just from the community understand what our plight is, and that there are people that's doing 30 and 40 years in prison and having no restorative justice or rehabilitation thing to come back into society. And it's just like if a person that say if a guy has a life sentence and his sentence is overturned, well, DOC has to release him, but while you're in prison, if you have over 20 years, you can't go get education classes. So you've been in prison sitting there doing nothing but raking the yard or doing a job, working in the gym, passing out weights, and now you're not educated because you had too much time in prison. But the court system, you can have clemency, and one day you're going home and now you don't know nothing past a high school diploma, don't know how to use a computer. And that's coming back to society where it's a lot has changed. It's a lot just to cross the street and hear the thing talking to you saying stop, stop, stop. Or when I left, there was payphones. When I left, there was newspaper machines. Everything's on the internet now. Reading a book is on the internet. So, and we never think about that stuff when we was in prison. People say it's like, oh yeah, okay, but I can still go get a book. No, not really. You're going to get everything off of this. So, and I don't think we realize that when we're in prison, how far technology has moved on. And when you're in there, all you have is your plans and dreams. So you have these things, I'm going to do this when I get out, I'm going to do this. And then it's like, I talked to Renika every day when I was in prison almost. I talk to Renika probably once a month now because I work so much. So she works, I work. So it's not, people don't think about it when they're in there, and people tell you like it's fast, but it's not. I've kind of lost the connection with my children because life has I want to stay busy. I'm working 2 jobs sometime and trying to buy cars for my kids and proud of them for doing things. But it's like, I just think all those things is part of restorative justice, to be prepared. So it's a lot of guys ready to come home, but a lot of guys aren't prepared to come home. And that starts with the community going sometime into these prisons and volunteering their time and these organizations that you're part of, going in there. So they have a thing called the TEACH program where guys are learning education and outside entities are paying for their education. So when I first went to prison, we can get degrees and stuff. So now you can only get a high school diploma or GED, and that's it. So I don't want to talk too much.
So, like, adding into everything that was just said, I guess for our legislators and Solicitor General here, so what are some state policies, if any, that are in place right now that encourage restorative justice practices and these other just within society, and then also within the prison systems and the juvenile, because I know that you two are both on the juvenile Council of Juvenile Justice.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm going to dial it in a little bit different direction if I can for just a little bit. We're in a time of real change, and from a policy perspective, we're looking at maybe for Washington State, more innovative approaches. When I think about restorative justice, I think about a system that incarcerates fewer people, incarcerates people for less time, where there are fewer crimes and fewer victims. And our current system is based on punishment and in some cases retaliation. And it's built on a philosophy that's in our RCWs as a state, a philosophy of doing time for the crime, but there's really no such thing in that construct as enough time. So we have over the years implemented strategies like sentencing grids, mandatory minimums, and really had a lot of pushback for any kind of reform of the system where both the person who's being incarcerated for the crime and the person who's been the victim of the crime feel any kind of success at the end of that time period. There's still a concern that the time is not long enough to assure public safety or to have healing on the part of the victim. And so now we're faced with things like overcrowding, things like unjustifiably long sentences, things like any proposals to reduce the length of incarceration and improve the services received while incarcerated so that we can reduce the potential of recidivism, someone committing a new crime, by equipping them to live in the society and succeed in the society. Because in some ways, there are people who say, if you're going to succeed, Daryl, what happened to the victim? Did the victim succeed? Did the victim heal? Did the victim get education? Is the victim personally, physically whole? Or do they have lingering health problems? What about their mental health status? And so we're given the opportunity now to think about things differently and to see if there's a way to construct a system that allows for all of that to happen on both ends of the continuum. And so sometimes that might even mean communication, negotiation, a time for people to express their hurt and despair, both ends, you know. But I sit on the Sentencing Guidelines Commission, and we did pass a bill this year that will look at a structure of having a task force to address the several proposals that have now come out of the Sentencing Guidelines Commission on how to look at the sentencing grid. And what do we as a state want to allow and not allow for communication, skills development, negotiation to take place within a structure of laws and limits. So we're not abandoning the sort of the retaliation, the doing your time kind of approach fully, but we're trying to find ways to soften it in a way that improves the lives of people coming out of the system. 97% of the 18,000 people in our prison system today are going to come home. And so what do we as a society, where's the justice for us as a full society if our system just plunks them back out into the community without any kind of skills that they need to survive, much less thrive, so that they don't commit an additional crime. And so we're starting to get it, you know, we're starting to understand that You can't just retaliate against someone who's committed a crime. You have to be in partnership with them so that they can succeed. And so we now have, I think Department of Corrections has been actually pretty open to recognizing that they have a role, and if they're resourced properly, they can be assisting in that process. So we now look at the first day in prison as being the first day you start planning for reentry. And that means that we've had rules in place where someone can't get education until just before they get out, because it's something like they might forget something. And so, it's sort of like that parental thing of, making sure that the kid just on the way out the door understands about something as they head to school. We're recognizing now through science that brain development actually needs that kind of constant opportunity to grow and thrive. And so we're looking at education in prison differently now. We passed another law this year dealing with access. And you kind of have to understand, though, and I'm sorry to be grabbing so much time here, but there's a lot of resistance to these kinds of reform efforts. So it's not out of the realm of possibilities, because it happens every year, when someone will say, I don't want you, Daryl, to get that skill because I didn't get to send my kid to college or to, voc ed school or whatever. I didn't get the chance to have my child have that kind of opportunity. What is it? We have to commit a crime. We have to have a victim before we get an education, before the state will pay me to help my kids. So we also have passed now legislation that pretty much for low-income kids, they're going to be able to get a post-secondary education in our state. And but it's all together. We have to look at this from a compassionate model of intervention, hopefulness, peacemaking, and I think we're heading there, but it's not without the kind of push me, pull me kind of reality that we face as policy proposers, I guess, in the legislature.
I'll add that, well, first and foremost, Senator Darnielle is not tooting her own horn nearly enough, but she's been doing this work for 20 years and has been a champion on these issues. And I've only been in for 3.5. And what we've been able,
God, she's there. A partner.
We spend a lot of time together. Just what I've seen in the 3.5 years, it's remarkable. So that my first session, to your point, my first session, we still had the ban on spending any money, state money, on education within prisons. I heard that floor speech. The next year, the same person who gave the speech the year before said, even if you don't agree with this, you can't deny the data. And then we lifted the ban on education in prisons. Now we need to get more money invested. So we actually have programs. Right now, it's mostly just the nonprofits that are doing the work. This year, we passed a pilot that I think is happening in Purdy to do secure internet, which of course is critical to folks being prepared to reenter society. We also did not a pilot, but I think full rollout of secure internet in our juvenile rehabilitation facilities. Again, thinking about those young people coming home and needing to get digital learning opportunities and other things while they're inside. So there's a lot of progress there. And I was just floored with how rapid that change happened just in, again, a few sessions. And then over the last 2 years, we just broke through a dam on juvenile justice. And it's been pretty amazing to watch. Senator Darnielle mentioned brain development, and I think what we've been talking about a lot in the legislature is adolescent brain development and helping to educate our colleagues that brains are developing until about 25 years old. And we have all the science now to verify kind of what we all knew about teenagers making pretty dumb mistakes, being really susceptible to peer pressure, having risk regulation problems. And so now what we're doing is we're aligning public policy to that science. We passed 5 bills this year and 2 or 3 last year that are fundamental changes to the justice system. And I forget the statistic. Roger Goodman, our colleague who chairs the Public Safety Committee on the House side, I got some stat that about like half of all crimes are committed by people under 25 years old. Ta-da! Like it makes sense now, right? Like we totally get it. So really the changes and the investments that we're making into the juvenile justice system, those are broader criminal justice reforms because we're getting them early, right? So just really quickly, I'm going to run through them as fast as possible, and then I'm happy to answer any other questions. Last year, Senator Darnell had a bill to lift the cap on diversions. So we have unlimited diversions now for young people. We passed last year, we rolled back several auto decline laws that were passed in the 90s, which are just terrible public policy. So for instance, we're no longer going to send a 16-year-old who commits robbery 1 automatically to the adult prison system. That's now back in exclusive juvenile jurisdiction. And we expanded how long we can keep juveniles in the juvenile system before they go to prison. Right now, or that was at 21 years old, we expanded that to 25. So that for 4 more years, they're in an age-appropriate rehabilitative setting. We did the part 2 of that this year, where we said those kids that do have adult convictions, they too can stay for 4 more years. We were actually able to make that one retroactive. So on a case-by-case basis, they're going back and looking at the kids who have already been transferred to DOC. And if they can be brought back, they will be. And that's about 74 kids. We ended the use of detention for non-criminal offenses, which is one of those big predictors of future criminal justice involvement. We are no longer going to detain and incarcerate kids for running away from home, for instance. This is, Jeannie's been working on this for years. That was a huge win, and it's being phased in over 4 years. These are what you call status offenses. They're only crimes because of the age of the kid. God, we did that. We updated to reflect technology changes. Mm-hmm. The state's child pornography statutes hadn't been touched in about 20 years, so we had about 50 young people convicted of Class B felony sex offenses for sending intimate images of themselves because it was child pornography. We changed that so that we are treating it like the dumb mistake that it is and focusing on educating kids about why you may not want to send intimate images of yourself out into the universe. I know I'm forgetting one.
Actually, I had it and I've lost it.
Yeah, I've lost it too, but we'll remember it at some point. But I think that's just demonstrates the breadth of change, and that's all mostly in the last 2 sessions, and then the broader stuff in the last 3.5 years. So pretty incredible.
We also pretty much eliminated juvenile legal financial obligations, which was another big area where kids that come out of the system, they're not job ready and they already have debt associated
tens
with
of thousands of
court
dollars.
costs and restitution to the victims and things like that. So those were addressed a couple years ago. We expanded the ability for counties to utilize funding for diversion systems so that we can actually not create a record for these kids. And then we also had juvenile sealing bills, record sealing bills. We're continuing to try to address the fact, and a lot of it is technology based, unfortunately, that for a period of time, the administrator of the courts was, instead of responding to individual records requests, they just released all of the records of all youth. Basically for about $14,000 a year income during the recession, the administrator of the courts was just selling all of the records of juveniles. So unfortunately, that was all data system based, and that meant that even if we were then to come back and seal those records, which we have now done, the horse was out of the barn, and if somebody got a hold of those records early enough on, that's going to follow a kid. But we're continuing to work on those kinds of issues, and there's still a lot more to go. But the whole area of juvenile justice reform had been pretty lazy river kind of approach. We've been making some changes over the years. but we didn't really recognize until the Supreme Court recognized, the U.S. Supreme Court recognized that brain development means that kids, the science means that kids are different from adults, and we needed to go back and look at our laws. So we went back and were able to eliminate juvenile life without parole. We had about, I think, 56 young people that were in the prison system. Most of them now have had their cases reviewed, and many have been released who had life without parole sentences. So kids as young as 13 years of age were sentenced to life in our state that have now had all those systems.
Lots to be excited about.
Yeah, I'll add something quick. I think one thing that's important for folks to understand that's different in Washington than some other states is that our criminal justice system is really dispersed, and the local governments do a lot of it. The counties, we have 39 counties, and each one of them has their own prosecutor's office, their own method of providing public defense. And that means that they do things in very different ways. And we don't, in the AG's office, we don't oversee that work. We do actually almost no criminal cases in the AG's office, whereas in some other states, the AG's office does all of it or a large part of it. So that's a big difference that just in general, I think people should understand that in terms of criminal justice reform, it's mostly about passing laws that control the system, and then also working with the individual counties, which have wildly different political philosophies and constituencies and such around the state. So that's just, I think, it's both a challenge and an opportunity, because there's a lot of room for some counties that want to try new things to do that. But there's also some counties that are going to be a lot harder to persuade than others, and where maybe the legislature might have to just change the laws generally to lead to change. And then the last thing I'd say, just echoing off something that T said and something Daryl said, is that I think everyone would acknowledge that kind of once you're already in court, which we are a lot in the AG's office and on a whole range of things, on criminal justice issues, the system has already sort of failed in some way or other, because, even the best case scenario at that point is not that great. And so I do think, and from my own personal experience also, so much more focus on early education and opportunities, and not having kids go into the system in the first place is really going to be the most, the most important thing we can do.
If I can just add one last thing, seeing Aaron in the room, this reminds me that one of the real common denominators for people that are in our justice system is that they had challenges. Many were foster kids, so they had dual system involvement there. But they also might have had a learning disability, and so they had trouble in school. Maybe they were LGBT, and they were bullied in school, or so we're seeing real changes in the way public education is implemented, moving to a compassionate school model versus that's the wing with all the behavioral kids, all the badasses are over here in that classroom, stay away from them, marginalize. So those systems are changing. But one of the things we have in the state is we've had a BECA law, which has required a court action for kids that were truant from school. And it was seriously only 5-6 years ago that I found out that Washington was such an outlier in the incarceration of kids who were truant, that it was a shocking level of outlier, that literally 30% of the kids in the country who were incarcerated for being a truant were in Washington state. And incarceration in those 38 counties that have jails and juvenile detention facilities, very different models for how to approach that. But in some counties, those kids leave court the same way the kid who committed robbery 1 leaves court, in shackles, heading off to be strip searched, living in a jumpsuit, being housed right alongside the kid who has just committed robbery 1, and finding that maybe their marginalization is less there in detention because now I've got a new best friend, and so 30% of the nation's numbers in Washington were in Washington state. So 2,700 times in 1 year in 2013 we incarcerated kids for truancy. Half of the Washington numbers are in Grays Harbor County, one county. So there is, just as we think of mass incarceration and we think of the prison industrial complex, we have to follow money to find out sometimes where a problem is, you know. And so we had created a system in Washington State by requiring a petition that required money, and it required the courts to have an action. And so we're not done with it, but we've got a 4-year timeline now to end this practice and to build out the kinds of systems that need to exist. And those are basically family intervention services. And we built out now through the school districts, the community truancy board model, which is having huge positive results for kids and families already in doing that, to find out not that truancy is the problem. Truancy is not the problem. It's just the symptom of a problem. And so finding out what's happening in a family and how the school district can help link those families and those kids to resources is really going to make that difference in whether or not they proceed and are impacted later in the justice system. So I had to throw that in. Sorry.
Can I say something real quick?
Yes, go ahead.
I just want to speak and commend you guys, because it is to catch the kids, to do those programs like for juvenile justice, because just going to prison at 19 and you see kids come in that have a year sentence and they change it into 10 because just of the culture there. And I just think parents should understand that each child has a rites of passage, and it's just based on your culture. As Black kids, our rites of passage, and it's sad, as Black males, you're only considered to be revered some way if you go to prison, if you can fight, if you can stand up for yourself, the macho thing. And the same thing for Latino boys. It's like, you have to be tough. You're acknowledged by being great, by saying, oh, you're a fool, or like, and then you live up to that. So you want to live up to that. We give ourselves names that denote who we are, and we want to live up to that. But for a young white kid going to prison, he has to prove his race when he goes in. And that could mean 1 year being a life sentence if somebody's putting a knife in your hands, and I just don't think, and I'm not just talking about just going to prison, I'm talking about kids have a rites of passage in their neighborhoods where they just want to, like she said, LBGT, if they have something that they're ashamed of, they'll do things as peer pressure just to fit in, and your kids are putting themselves in a bad situation. So I think it's great that they're dealing with juveniles, and, you know, because you're 18, 19 years, I didn't come from a bad home. My father was a 19-year veteran in the military, and I never wanted for nothing as a kid. I made a conscious choice to join a gang because I didn't feel significant enough at home. So those are decisions that kids are making. And some kids don't really have the choices I had. Some kids, it's like, either I'm going to go hungry tonight, or I'm going to hang out with these older guys that's going to give me crack or meth or something to go sell where I can make money. And this is a decision a kid is making, a live or die situation, because before next he's going to need a gun to protect himself because he's so little. So it's just, I love Washington. We are one of the most diverse states in the world, and I think we're doing great things with our politicians, with our communities. We just have to continue to have the courage as parents, as adults, to tell a kid to stop. You never, I don't think kids are going to turn around and shoot you in the face because you tell them, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. Just as a woman or a man walking by and say, I don't think you should be doing that. I consciously do these things when I see kids on the streets or I'm walking somewhere. Just as, maybe I can stop a person from just thinking that way, just saying, you shouldn't be doing that. And sometimes I just leave it at that and hope it's a bug. I just think we have to have the courage as a people, because we've all lost our way, not just the kids, our rites of passage. The same thing with politicians, parents. But she was saying about money, putting tags on things. We lost our way, and it's all right for us to find ourselves and to pull ourselves back up and, get back together. And I think it's great. Anything I can do, and the community people, the people I was in prison with that we're out, we still get together. We go to each other's house and play poker and sit down and just talk. So it's like we have to be there for each other. because we're part of this community and this is our society, all of us. So we have to have forums like this. And it's long-winded, but I commend you guys. And I'm from Tacoma. So I want to do things to help you guys. If I can help, be involved in anything. And but I just need you guys to understand how important the juvenile thing is. Some states, some kids I helped that was in Monroe County. I think Everett, something. They used to bring the kids up when I was at that prison. And they had a deter program. Like you said, each office was different. Those kids didn't go to prison. They didn't go to juvenile. Their sentence was to come into the prison and to talk to us, and it never hit the books. So if they was doing graffiti, if they was doing something that the police deemed, and we need these in our communities. That's the kind of police I dealt with when I was a kid. We had boxing clubs, and we have to have those things back in our communities. Thank you.
Okay, so another question I want to start off with T and then hear from you again is, so after hearing from Noel and Jean just about all the new policies and laws that are being put and implemented, if you were in a place of power, like, are there any other policies, laws that you would like to see in place? And then to follow up with that, do you think that these policies, along with restorative justice, could help put a stop to the school to prison pipeline, or help change in any way? I know that the school to prison pipeline is such a huge controversial topic and everyone thinks they have a solution, and a law will be put into place and they realize it doesn't work and then it gets trashed and they try something new. But do you think what they're working on, along with restorative justice, that this could make a change?
So I am also an immigrant. After serving my time, I was picked up by immigration. But even when I had been sentenced and when I had started my time, the first thing they told me was that I was not allowed any educational classes because I had an ICE detainer. And I've grown up in America my whole life. I came here when I was 2 years old. So I may not be American, but I am Americanized. I love this country and everything it stands for. But when they told me that, I was a little bummed out. But I didn't let that deter me from continually asking my counselor, can I get into a program? Because when you first start out, and especially at my age, they max you out, so they close you out into maximum custody for whatever reason. But I just felt like that was something, because when you get closed out maximum, you're in your room for 23 hours a day. So of course I'm going to be like, hey, can I do some school programs? But fortunately, they eventually gave me a class. What they said was, we didn't want to waste our resources, so we're going to put you in this class. It was Green Building 101, but I was going to take whatever class they was going to give me. But then going back to the immigration thing, at the Northwest Detention Center, and that's, that's immigration, so their policies differ a lot from state laws and stuff like that. But for me, it would be seeing some type of educational, even if it was like trade classes, because if we're not going to allow immigrants to come into the country, then maybe give them some type of resources so that they could expand in their own country. There are neighboring countries. I don't know how great of ties we have, but I know we get a lot of our produce from over there, such as California, as well as California. But I'm just saying, like, that would have been beneficial for me to come out and still have some educational classes or whatever type of classes in an immigration level. So I would like to see something like that happen.
I just think a lot of things I think that I had the power to do, you guys are already doing. That's along the lines. I think from the justice system, I kind of wish Washington State had a grand jury to where the community could be involved in having, is this crime really worth a life sentence compared to, we have a 3 strikes law here. I came out of prison with 2 strikes. I had 1 offense, but I have 2 strikes. So And I'm not getting in trouble no more, but it's like I come home with nothing. It would be hard for me to even protect my family if I wasn't using my bare hands. And it was my fault for doing that. I can't have a weapon, so I can't protect my family in that way. But I still think it was something, if a grand jury was in play, I think it would give the community, would be more involved in educating themselves and things like that. And just for the prison system, everything you guys are doing, other than it should be more on reentry.
Mm-hmm.
I should not have to did 27 years, 11 months, and 20 days, and was teaching a class. And when I went to camp on telling guys on how to get out of prison, I'm not the person supposed to be facilitating it. I've been locked up since I was 18, but the only job I could get to stay busy, because I was a model inmate and prisoner, is to teach guys how to go home.
Hmm.
So it's like, I did it because I want to help people. I want to help myself. I was picking up. So it was a double-edged sword. I was helping myself, but that's not sending guys home being ready to re-enter into society. And I just think that's reentry. There's a lot of money that goes into reentry. And there's a lot of programs there. I just don't think they're being utilized properly. And that's just, some people say I'm anti-DOC, pro-DOC. I'm both. I believe there's things there that is just should be implemented the proper way. I only had a relationship with my child because I had programs in prison. I've seen her every week. So I was in a trailer program. So I think fostering and nurturing families is key. It made me a human being. It kept me human. My children kept me human. So I think those things should be expanded to where guys have their family dynamics. So it's not so the divorce rate's not so high, or the child molestation is not so high when they come home. So I'm not saying all guys do that, but if you don't know how to deal with people and the way things are now, if you've never seen a woman walk around with semi-clad clothes on and you've been locked up and you get out and you see things like this, it's like it could be almost traumatizing to you if you haven't been around a young girl. Me help raising my daughter and stuff. So that could be traumatizing to a guy who's been in prison for 30 years. And I just think if you had the family dynamics in prison, maybe broaden, it would help in the reentry stage.
So, a question for anybody is, how do we start to eliminate the school to prison pipeline? And you guys have talked a lot about education. We talked a lot about juvenile justice. How do Daryl said, it starts with education. So how do we stop? How do we eliminate that?
Yeah. I mean, I can add that I said earlier, Jeannie and I spend a lot of time together. We're also on the Children's Mental Health Work Group together. And I think we have mental health related issues in our work on our committees. And I think a lot of work that we're doing right now is looking at ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and really trying to understand the impact that that's having on children. And so, you have kids that have behavioral issues at school. I think in years past, there's so much exclusion from school, expulsions, suspensions. You mentioned earlier kids being designated maybe inappropriately as special education, and obviously in previous decades being segregated from the classroom. Now, of course, we have integrated special ed, but I think we're looking a lot right now about recognizing that there's kids spend so much time in school. How can we bring those resources to them? So, we've done things in the last year, for instance, of adding a behavioral health navigator for each of the educational service districts, just to give the counselors that are in each individual school somebody to call and think about how to leverage resources when they're recognizing a kid is in distress. And so there's so much work around that. I will tell you, and it's very vexing for us, the intersection of developmental disabilities with our juvenile justice system, with special ed, with our behavioral health system. We're really trying to figure that out. I mean, it's really a big question. And I was with the ARC of King County last night. Disability Rights Washington starting to get more involved, where they're recognizing that kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities are inappropriately being pipelined into the justice system. So they're starting to take a more active role. So I think all the investments that we can make, and the earlier we can make them, the better. And so what you said earlier about early childhood education, we have all the data in the world to tell us making early learning investments will pay off. But we're looking at that, what trauma is happening and how can we address it and give the kids the interventions they need as early as possible. so that they can stay focused on school and not be excluded from the classroom for things that are really beyond their control.
I would like to hear from you, Tian. I don't know your age, but you seem pretty young. So just like, what do you think could be some next steps in eliminating?
School to prison pipelines.
Yeah.
I definitely don't have the answer to that. I would shoot for maybe video games. A person I know, he's 28 right now, 27, 28. And he's been playing video games his whole life and hasn't gotten in trouble. Now, that doesn't mean everybody, I mean, I'm not saying he won't get into some type of shenanigans or whatever. I think there was a couple of times where the police ended up at the house because there's a whole bunch of cars. But maybe doing something in a way where, so like my baby sister the other day, she has chores. One of them is to get the dog poop around the house, but who likes picking up poop. So we have a shovel, and we also have a bush, and a very big bush. So what I had seen was it was fun for her all of a sudden when I said just fling the poop into the bushes rather than picking up the poop and throwing it in the garbage. So maybe that type of spin, I don't know.
Just like kind of what I'm getting is more after school programs or just programs that target what students like to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't want to speak out of turn, but I've dealt with people from the prison to the pipeline that work in King County, and they said that they use the data from kindergarten, Head Start, on how many prisons to build. They use the data from the kindergarten, preschool. They're connected. There's a reason why it's called the kindergarten, to the pipeline to the prison, because they use the data on how kids are doing in those ages on whether they're going to build a prison or not. So I think the best way to deal with that is to quit building prisons. We have to try to find a way, especially juveniles. The BPC and the Village of Hope was part of a campaign to stop building a new juvenile system in King County. And they lost. They built it, but they're tearing school down, closing schools to build juvenile facilities. That's just another example of how we lost our way. How it's like we're investing money in the likelihood of people becoming criminals. It's like we're betting on them being bad. We're betting on them. And if you're betting on something, putting your money into it, you're going to push them that way. It's for business. So it's like, I took a class before and they said it's called self-fulfilling prophecy. If you tell a person something for so long, he starts to believe it or she starts to believe it. So if you, excuse my language, but if you tell your kid that they're not about nothing, they start to believe that. If you tell your young daughters as women, or somebody's on the side and their mother was a certain way and the grandmother is saying, you're going to be just like your mother, the daughter's not stupid. She can pick up on that saying, you think I'm going to be a mother ass. So it's like, if we're putting this stuff into prisons, society sees it, people start to believe it. We're putting stuff on the news saying all people are violent, and we can't continue to invest into prisons and tearing down schools. It's problematic.
If I can add, Daryl, you're absolutely right about the data. It might surprise everybody to know that we can now predict some children in some communities that will end up in our justice system. One of the predictors now is what is the level of language acquisition at 18 months of age. 18 months of age. I'll tell you about two brothers I know, twins. At the age of 47, I became a tutor to one of them who they were both illiterate. One spent his life in and out of the justice system. The other was the nicest guy on the planet and could talk anybody into helping him. But at 47, they were both still illiterate. They had severe childhood trauma, the adverse childhood experiences that Noelle talked about. We have to remind ourselves that these aren't just academic things that happen to children. These are things that happen to them without their permission. without their permission, these things happen to them, and their brains become traumatized by these experiences. So talking with the fellow that I was working with on language acquisition, learning how to read, to hear about what they were trying to do at the ages of 2 and 3 years of age to stay alive in their family, where they had already witnessed an older brother being shot and killed on their porch. They'd already witnessed gang members moving into the home and taking over the home for years. And they could not, their brains could not function. They could not learn to read. There was not a pathway. They had to be trained into it with a lot of interaction. We know through things like music therapy that you can train the brain even later in life. But crazy bad things that happen to children, and these issues about whether or not they know this is a red cup, that this is a phone, this is a fork, this is a plate. That kind of language acquisition helps the brain learn how to solve problems. It makes children inquisitive. Having books available, when a kindergarten teacher will go into a home and not see one word written down in that house. There's not one thing that has words on it in the house. No magazines, newspapers, books, no bills, no flyers, no anything in the home. The child has to have that available to them. They have to see it in order for their brain to absorb the concept of solving a problem and figuring out what an A is. An A and T together is at. That's all stuff that happens at an age before they get to school, And so the more early childhood education interventions we can do, the better. I had the great fortune of writing the Early Childhood Education Assistance Program, regs, for the state of Washington, setting it up along a Head Start model in 1986, and was able to visit the Perry Preschool Project in Ypsilanti, Michigan, which is where they started the process of studying children's and family interventions, and finding that 20 years into that system, they could predict things like how many of those young women were going to be pregnant, how many of those kids were going to be graduating from high school, how many of them were going to end up in the justice system, in part because whether it's the youth getting the skills or it's their families getting the skills, the financial education, the problem-solving skills, that's where we have to intervene. It's way, way, way as early as we can.
Monica, can I add one thing? I'm not going to add a lot because I'm way out of my lane. Can I add one little thing?
Go ahead.
So I would be remiss if we did not call out, given that we are being hosted today by the Equity in Education Coalition and the Racial Equity Team, that we know the school to prison pipeline disproportionately puts kids of color in the justice system. And I say I'm out of my lane because I think this is an issue that kind of from a jurisdiction standpoint ends up in K-12, which I'm not on that committee, but experts in the room, I'm sure, would agree. Cultural competency for our white educators, because our kids of color are more often taught by white teachers than they are members of their own community, right? So there's one, cultural competency with white educators, but second, just having more educators of color. To your point earlier about mentors and people to look up to, and I think, hearing how underrepresented people of color are in the teaching corps, it really makes an impact on young people and how they're interacting with the adults in their life. So I don't have great solutions, but I certainly recognize and acknowledge it as a problem.
And T, you wanted to add
Yeah, I just
something
wanted
to
to piggyback off of what you both were saying as far as having a role model to look up to. I think the best thing within the family is that open line of communication. You always hear fathers, or I heard a father say once, like, I encourage you to tell your kids that you can talk to me about anything, but then it's an actual thing. Another thing, if the kid actually does or not. For me, I was just thinking about it a little bit harder. Me and my grandmother, I was raised by my grandmother. She's 78, 79 right now. And there wasn't just a cultural barrier because one, I'm a Cambodian child raised in America, but there was also a language barrier where she's talking to me in Cambodian. I have to try to understand that. And then another barrier where my mom, she is now living in America, but she speaks broken English, so I understand her more when she speaks Cambodian rather than when she's speaking English. So there's that language barrier, and I don't know. I don't want to say it's just with Cambodian parents, because I know everybody has problems, but during the Khmer Rouge and the Pol Pot regime, that is something that a lot of Cambodian parents do not like talking about. I think just for parents to be able to express how they're feeling about certain things as well can also help with the dynamics between a parent and their child.
So I just want to take this time to open it up for questions if we have any. I'll start with Bernal.
Yeah, Bernal Bach, I'm the chair of the racial equity team, and I'd like to just point out something. This past legislative session, we had some of the best legislation I've seen in 12 years working up on the Hill. But it took a great amount of leadership. And you're looking at two individuals here that you're praising today for the leadership they've taken on these particular issues. But they've also done it for many more issues that you don't even know about. And the comment that I want to make about that is, I think goes back to the gentleman who was talking about, what can we do, right? What should we be doing? You need to look at these two individuals and see their background, where they came from, who they are, and why did we vote for them to represent us. And I want to commend them because it took their leadership this year and the leadership of the House and the Senate and the governor to sign this legislation. And so when we talk about wanting to do something, you need to really examine the people you are voting for. And it, when you scratch the surface here, and I'm going to be a little bit political, that not all legislators supported what these individuals did. In fact, they fought them. And we need to vote those folks out and replace them with people who think like these individuals. So I'm urging all you younger people to and us older folks who vote to get involved with your legislative district, find out who the individuals are who are representing you, and think of these two individuals because they need more help. We did this with 3 or 4 seats that were able to make us a majority to get this kind of thought. But these folks have to fight like hell to get there. So I want to commend my colleagues.
Well, I have to say, I would not have survived my first 2 years in the House without the woman in the stripes over here, Velma. Who sat next to me on the floor of the House going, what? You should do this. So it takes mentoring all the way along.
Sure does.
Any other questions?
I had a question. Could you talk briefly about the role of for-profit prisons in the ability to make some of these changes and the durability of the school-to-prison pipeline and the durability of the resistance of funding and resourcing inmates?
Well, we don't have any for-profit prisons in Washington State right now. But one of the
detention facilities.
Yeah, just the
that's the federal detention facilities are for profit. So those are run by GEO. But that doesn't mean we haven't in the past sent prisoners when we've had overcrowding situations or when we've had behavior management challenges in a prison. We haven't sent people out of state, and they have gone to for-profit prisons in Colorado and, well, many other states across the West. So we did have a bill. The author is now just retired from the Senate, but a bill dealing with how we can, we right now we're overcrowded in our prisons. We have about 102% census right now in the male prisons, and it's 111% in the female prison and work release. So we have to deal with building another prison or having one built or sending more people out. That's at that end of it.
Yeah.
Or letting people release to community facilities, or to whether it's at the juvenile level or at the adult level, or reinstate parole, which we haven't had that, or expand community supervision options versus keeping somebody in prison for longer and longer and longer periods of time. And we have hundreds of people in prison right now that are there because they don't have a discharge plan. They've already done their time, So there are those kinds of things. Or there's get it back up here at the front end and do more about diverting people from the system, or creating, like we have now, a community parenting alternative, which means that someone who's within a year of release, who has a custodial relationship with a child, who hasn't had additional infractions and a whole bunch of other benchmarks, can actually get an early release and have home monitoring and do work on their parenting and their reestablishment and reintegration with their families. So we're looking at all kinds of options in order that we don't have to have a for-profit prison. So we do have a bill. We'll probably run it out again this year, even though that sponsor's gone now. That'll just sort of build more of a framework of philosophy, I guess. We don't want DOC to automatically move to that kind of a system out of desperation for space.
Thank you.
And so I do have a question from our executive director. She wants to know, will we be decriminalizing offenders who are in prison for marijuana offenses?
So we did pass, that are in prison. So we passed the vacation law, so people get their records vacated, but people that are currently in prison.
I think we will be back. We also had another issue, which was we cracked 3 strikes law this year by removing assault 2 from the list of strikeable offenses. To get it through and to the governor to sign, we had to make it prospective. Like most of our laws are prospective, like from the point of the passage and the signing and going into effect. Like this next week, a lot of laws going into effect later this month, that people affected by it after that point are the ones that are benefiting from the policy change. But there's a whole bunch of people back behind this system that had that marijuana offense or had that assault 2 as one of their strikeable offenses. And so whether it's through a clemency process, or we'll come back and probably have a bill that will vacate those records. But there's still, if somebody's already in prison for one of those offenses, there's still going to be some sort of a review process, whether it's the clemency board or the indeterminate sentencing review board, or the governor can commute a sentence. Those kinds of things can happen.
We also didn't vacate sentences for crimes committed before the 21st birthday, since the law makes it only legal at 21. So we vacated 21 and over, but we didn't vacate it when people were under 21, which problematic. So I think we'd like to come back and tackle that as well.
And Noah, did you have anything to add along to either this question or also the question about for-profit prisons?
Yeah, you read my mind. I was actually I did want to add, because it's a little bit confusing, that we don't have in our state system any private prisons, but the federal detention system, immigration detention, uses them a lot, including the facility in Tacoma. And I don't know if folks know, but we have actually sued the GEO group that owns that for most recently about essentially violating the labor laws of the state by forcing the detainees to do a lot of the work of maintaining the facility without paying them basically anything for doing that. And that case is going very well, and hopefully we'll be able to prevail, and they will not be able to engage in that practice anymore, and we'll have to pay people fairly for the work that they're doing. The other thing I was going to add was on Initiative 502. In the AG's office, we don't propose initiatives or things like that, but we certainly help implement them after they pass and defend them against challenges. So we've done a lot of work advising state agencies about how to implement 502, and then there have been a number of lawsuits and trying to work to prevent the federal government from shutting it down and coming after us as a state for authorizing something that's illegal still under federal law. And I think that's been a big success story in terms of keeping people out of the criminal justice system, bringing in tax revenue that can be used for good programs, schools and drug treatment and so on. And I'm glad that we've been able to help prevent that from being either shut down by the feds or just not functioning, facing some of the challenges that they've had in other states.
Yes.
So I think when you talk about restorative justice, especially in this context, we're talking about like a restoration between a perpetrator and a victim, or in that dynamic. And at least from what I know, I think there's a lot of trauma that happens to incarcerated people while they're incarcerated and after incarceration, and also like the trauma that police officers cause in community. Are you aware of any projects that focus on like restoring the trauma caused from law enforcement or the criminal justice side to people who are caught up in that system? And if you're not aware of programs, are there things that you think community members could be engaged in to bring some healing to that dynamic?
I would like to, would you mind speaking on that?
I actually did some research. I don't know if that kind of program is available here in Washington, but it was a program where the person who was offended and the person who had caused the crime, with an agreement from both parties that they would like to meet, they were able to do so, and the person, apologized and said what he had to say to the victim, and the victim said what they had to say to the other person, and they were able to have. And those are some. I think they were explaining like sometimes those are kind of dicey because it could get heated and there could be things that were said and the person just didn't like it. But you also have to look at it like when a person is saying sorry or apologizing, it's not a good apology when you say I'm sorry but you did this. That's not, what I mean? So I think that's one of the main things. But also I think it just depends if the victim is willing to move in that direction. I personally did not reach out to the victim, but my fiance did, and I don't think the victim was in that space where she felt like she could forgive the actions that were done. That was sad, but I know where I'm moving, and I know where I see my life, and I know it was a mistake in my past, so I'm trying to move on for that. But that doesn't mean I don't think about that person and how she's doing, if she's okay, is she mentally stable, and things of that nature. Because when police are involved and you got to go to court, that whole type of situation is very chaotic, and that's not the only stress, or the stress from that issue is not the only thing you're receiving. There's all the other factors You got to go to work, got to get it, get your money, pay the bills, and everything just adds up and piles on. So it just falls into the corner of if the victim is willing to do so. And if not, even for like a face-to-face thing, maybe a letter, so. But no, I do not know of any programs here in the state.
Well, I was in a class in 1998, and it was called Restorative Justice. And there's a couple guys in that met their victims, but by law, you can't do that in Washington State no more. Our what's it called? Our judgment and sentencing. It says you are not to have no contact with your victim unless the victim contacts DOC or legislators or something and asks, can they meet with us? But you hardly ever see that anymore. I know a guy's been in prison since 1966. He still communicates with his victim's family. They still come up and visit him on his visiting list. So, but that's the only time I've ever heard of that. But in restorative justice class I was taking, they was trying to get that erased from our judgment since if our victims want to come meet with us so we could have some type of reconciliation and just get some closure on both sides. But I've never heard of anything like that with police officers coming in, or even when we was released. And it's weird because we both have restitution. And when I got out, I tried to pay off my restitution incomplete, thinking it would go partially to my victim's family, but it's in collections. My victim's family has already been taken care of. My money just goes to collections. And I have 2 other crime partners. So when I was in prison, mine was mine by itself. When I got out, they told me I could not pay off my restitution unless I paid off my crime partners as well. So I offered to pay $4,500 of my money that I had saved in prison towards this, and they told me I could only pay it off if I was paying $111,000 of my crime partners, which are out also, still paying into theirs. So I don't pay none of it now. I can't afford. I had to put my money towards raising my family and stuff, but I tried to pay it off in total, and they told me I couldn't unless I was paying all of it. That's crazy.
So we have reached time. I apologize if we couldn't get everyone's question. If maybe some of the panelists stick around, you can be able to ask them then. I want to thank everyone for coming out today. We really appreciate that. And thank you so much to our panelists for being here.
Thank you to our moderator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.